Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the Supply Chain Dialogues podcast, where we will be diving into the procurement, supply chain, and operations management world. We got insights for you into new, old, and even outdated truths, and hopefully that will make you more successful in your job by expanding your knowledge of solutions which are out there. My name is Daniel Helmig, your host for the show. I ran supply chains, procurements, and operations globally in 5 industries for more years than I care to remember.
And I'm Amy, the AI-generated co-host voice of the show. I will ask the questions and provide from time to time facts and figures provided from my other AI siblings.
Thank you, Amy. Let's dive into the show. This episode is called Aligning the Division of Labor. So welcome to the third and final installment of our mini-series on organizational design. We believe that aligning our organization's design with the firm's culture and markets can significantly reduce the need for costly redesigns and organizational reshuffling. If you missed the earlier podcast on corporate headquarters and functional design, we recommend listening to them first and then come back to this podcast. Today we will delve deeply into the overarching theme of division of labor, a concept many companies consider strangely as a given. By clearly defining roles and responsibilities, an organization can mitigate friction between functions, positions, and hierarchical levels, allocating resources to work collaboratively for the firm's customers and product. As so often in the podcast, we are back to the history of what we call today industry and manufacturing.
In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, automation fueled by steam engines and other machines was at the forefront of this seismic change, driving suddenly the need for a precise definition of the division of labor, who does what, when and how. The traditional approach of having one person, be it a cobbler, baker, shoemaker, or smith, handle an entire task from beginning to end was replaced by subdividing and distributing the work steps among many individuals. This new approach was not limited to product or service creation but extended to all corporation aspects.
Apart from the horizontal aspect of labor division, the vertical or hierarchical aspect of authority models was also crucial in coordinating output and speed. Who is responsible for what? Who can tell whom what to do, etc. The success of this model paved the way for subsequent industrial revolutions and continued to shape modern organizational design, or at least that's what we have been told. In reality, as to be expected in social Darwinian structures, most companies disappeared over time, while the few that found the right mix of automatization, innovation, and labor division succeeded to unparalleled prosperity to former, mainly agricultural settings that prevailed for many centuries. Despite being in operations for approximately 2 centuries, the division of labor concept has become so ingrained that many leaders wrongly assume it's to be a kind of a natural law in the business world. As a result, they often neglect the need for a clear and defined approach for their company, assuming that everyone naturally knows what to do. This misconception results everywhere in high inefficiencies, leading to missing revenue, low operating margins, and slow innovation cycles. When the division of labor, including authority levels, are not properly defined, it leads to ill or unstructured organizations. This in turn causes the organization to balloon in size with slow responsiveness and unnecessary feedback loops. Decisions are elevated to unnecessary levels, creating frustration among customers, employees, and the management. Ultimately, this can lead to a negative impact on the owners and the stakeholders. As discussed in earlier podcast, if performance is unsatisfactory, leadership often turns to the shiniest tool in the corporate toolbox, the ever-so-popular reorganizations. This may include changing matrix setup from central to decentral or regional to global, building up and later slashing organizational layers, or outsourcing or divesting non-performing entities or functions completely. A clear definition of labor and authority levels can be a smart alternative to this. It should be in the interest of any supervisory and management board to prioritize the proper definition of labor and authority levels rather than just relying on costly reorganizations as a quick fix. So let's attempt to set up a simple do-it-yourself guide for aligning everyone from CEO to shop floor worker. So, suppose your firm struggles with productivity issues, political games on many levels, and customer complaints about who to call. If you are in a senior leadership position, here is your litmus test. Are you getting called by either suppliers or customers when there is an issue? Do not feel good about it. It actually means that you did not empower your organization enough, plus might not have selected the right people to do the job. So there is a high probability that the 200-year-old division of labor concept was implemented too loosely in your shop. By aligning the definition of roles and responsibilities on each dimension of the matrix and defining the job and competency profiles, an organization can create a blueprint for what people really should be doing.
This enables assessing personnel in line with the job profiles, and any identified gaps can be closed through training or replacements. External standardized training by authorized organizations, such as ISM, CIPS, SMA, or a CCA, can ensure a high-capability standard, along with certification and regular retraining.
With discipline, this solution can be implemented within a year, providing you a strong foundation for achieving your financial goals and leaving the competition in the dust. Let's do this step where we identify where you are in the spectrum of here in division of labor and whether there is a gap that reveals itself when you review the statements below. So how many of the statements and questions that Amy asks can you answer with a resounding fact-based yes?
Do we have a governance document at the corporate level that clearly defines the roles and responsibilities of each part of our organization?
Any publicly traded company needs a corporate governance framework. We all know that. Unfortunately, this framework is often set up by lawyers and finance as part of the incorporation process and is therefore a bland document which fulfills all the tick boxes of regulators. But what we want is a living document, a document that is not hidden away in some governance department, but accessible to the most part to everyone in the company. It should be used as part of new employee initiations, to explain who does what, who can decide what, etc. Unless these new employees come from university or high school, they had the pleasure to work in another organization which will have had most probably different roles and responsibilities and thresholds of decisions, etc. Don't play roulette with your people hoping that someone will tell them what they can and cannot do, but define it. It takes about 3 months to put all authority roles, responsibilities of functions, corporate, regional, business, branches into a database, calibrate it, and get it approved from the management board. More about it later, but the impact when rolled out is magnificent. The noise level dissipates in a couple of months and people actually do what they are hired to do.
Does our human resources organization maintain an up-to-date RACI chart for each department, updated annually?
In the last podcast, we talked briefly about all these great different ways of how you can define who does what. There is RACI, Paris, Lacy, Rapid, PERD, and the cool-sounding vroom jet and jargon mode. Your employees will appreciate if your authority model does not only hold the major topics on CapEx spend, expense and travel approvals, but as well more intricate definitions like who leads mergers and acquisitions. Is it finance or strategy? Who owns the customer interface? Is it sales corporate, if existing, sales local, region, business, service? And who owns the supplier interface? Is it procurement, supply chain, operations, business? Who can communicate externally? Everyone? Corporate communication or local comms? And these are just a few of hundreds of grinding friction areas that can slow the company down if they are not clearly defined. And when this is fixed, it's an important document included in the corporate governance document, and therefore auditable.
Members of the board of directors spend less than 15 minutes each day to approve standard requests. In other words, leaders can lead while managers approve.
Just look at the signature maps of your top leadership, if such an old-fashioned thing still exists in your company. How thick are they every day? The thicker they are, the more the company leaders have decided to be managers rather than leaders. As a leader, you define swim lanes for your direct reports and the rest of the organization in which they can act more or less autonomously. If there is a crunch in your business and suddenly you are careful to spend or select the right customers, leaders narrow swim lanes for their people. Managers get into the water and swim themselves, with their heads so little above the water that they cannot look out far ahead. And if you really still have signature maps, implement at least an approval workflow tool. You can get them as standalone solutions or integrated into whole workflow systems. I will not spend time here on it, but there is no reason that approvals cannot be done automatic based on predefined routines through bots, or at least if humans need to be involved due to regulatory reasons. Have approval workflows that take hours rather than days and weeks. It makes you more agile and lets your people do the job you pay them to do.
Do we operate based on the guidelines outlined in the governance document and RACI chart?
I know of many companies that have a decent governance document, but it is secret or stored away somewhere not accessible to the general public in the company. If you have a governance model and an approval threshold document, it needs to be shared with the people being governed and needing to make approvals. So simple, so often not done in companies.
Do we have competency profiles in line with the governance and RACI established for each department and organization, from the head of the organization to individual contributors?
While the overall roles and responsibilities, tasks and objectives for each part of the organization belong into the corporate governance document, the next level down, which talks about the capabilities and competency people in the departments need to have to fulfill the objectives, etc., is a RACI chart that needs to be owned by human resources and tracked and maintained as probably one of the most important tasks HR can have. How else would you define human resources but the department that ensures that the right people with the right capabilities sit on the right jobs? In most companies, I witnessed that HR was not the owner of the document. If you were lucky as a department or organization head, they gave you some loose guidelines and that was it. Competence and responsibility design based on governance model we discussed above is one of the most important tasks an HR department can have. If you have this under control, hiring, selecting, training, promoting, investing in employees has a structure and it can be understood by everyone. Just drawing career paths is child play, and in most cases not adhered to by anyone, since the homework of competencies required for certain jobs was not done. So everyone can be chosen based on whatever criteria.
Do we have clear job profiles linked to the competencies of each department and organization?
Writing job profiles in line with the roles and responsibilities of the department, both horizontal and vertical, is an activity that every manager should be able to do. What do you want your people to do? Who does what? Who tells whom what to do? Just using tribal knowledge is a cop-out and a lousy management style. If managers have no time or interest to define this, they are no managers, but overpaid individual contributors that do not know how to orchestrate departments. Or they are part of an interesting breed of Machiavellian types who take an undefined working environment as a source to draw power from. When I was an individual contributor, we called this management style by unfortunately many of our bosses, management by champions. Leave people in the dark and from time to time drop manure or foul speech on them. We said it more drastically, but this is the clean podcast, so we leave it at that.
Do we relentlessly assess personnel against the competency profiles before offering new job positions? Do we require external certifications as qualifications for hiring, for example in quality, accounting, supply chain, sales, legal, and, here is an idea, leadership?
If your employees can be told in the half-yearly or quarterly feedback meetings what it will take them to get to the next level or different job, based on straightforward competency definitions that are part of the job profiles, people will strive to gain the level of competency they need. This is much more preferred than lifting or shifting people into new positions and then let them acquire the competencies. At the end, companies are no schools, and you pay people to execute at least at 70% of competency level when they take over a job, with the remaining 30% being learning on the job. This has a significant impact on the quality of your training processes. Just some nice-to-have trainings about emotional intelligence, compliance, and ESGs just don't cut it. So, for example, people will need to be able to shadow managers or other job holders that have the competencies they like to acquire. They need to be able to get short-term assignments in which they can learn while still being on their own job. Don't get me wrong, I fully subscribe to the concept of a learning organization. It is actually a must in my view. But if you look at most training curriculums of corporations, the trainings are done in a vacuum, without too much input of businesses, functions, and they need to train people the competencies they need. Both sides, HR and business, need to sit down and talk and structure what needs to be done to have a competent workforce aligned with the requirements of this business. Just give you one example. Together with a few excellent colleagues, many of them now in chief procurement officer positions in large companies, way back in time we developed a training catalog that was aligned with our competency model. We started with inheriting 3 miserable trainings that we disbanded, and 3 years later had 144 trainings for all different job types in our function, and later even a driver's license course that brought all of this together and helped us to give someone without further ado the reins of supplier management and procurement approval. We knew then that they swam in the swim lanes we defined, and guess what? We went from record to record in terms of cost reductions, and you have it. Greetings go out to the people that did this admirably. I'm still very proud of what we have accomplished.
In the case of new acquisitions, do we ensure that our roles and responsibility structure are implemented within the first 18 months of the acquisition?
We touched on this as well in the first part of the mini-series. I've seen so often that the acquired companies could still, for up to 3 years, keep their roles and responsibilities and approvals, circumventing the process the rest of the company had. It was a nightmare for the people that had to somehow start to integrate the new cousins, since anyone could raise a flag on their side and show that they have a get-out-of-jail card. So you created pseudo approval and information processes, and instead of the A as approval in the RACI, you had an I for inform, or at least a C for consulting during the integration. What a waste of time. In 6 months or directly from the start of an acquisition, approval and responsibility structure should be put in place in line with the company that had acquired the new folks. The benefit? Everyone in the company learns about the new business, the trials and tribulation of the new family members, and can get actively involved. Now, should there be guardrails around this so-called goose that laid the golden eggs and that now suddenly is asked to do ice cubes? Absolutely. But this is part of a good governance structure and does not take more than a few days to define.
Are our job profiles linked to career models considering cross-functional and geographical criteria to foster diverse and well-rounded leadership?
In the last podcast, we talked about the need for rotation between the different dimensions of the organization to have people walk at least for a mile in the other department's shoes. If you like to have a company that gels well together, the people on different levels need to take over short or midterm assignments, and these assignments or jobs need to be defined in a career model queue. What does it take to become a manager in a department is different to becoming a section head, regional leader, or division head. Beside the knowledge they gain from being linked into other areas of the company, it as well, if rotations and assignments are done into different territories of the firm, gives them as well a feel and a sense of modesty in understanding that their cultural imprint is not the only one that works. It makes them later more humble leaders when they deal with diverse markets and employees. These were the questions and statements to find a gap on the topic of the division of labor in your shop. If you answered yes to most questions, excellent. You control the concept of division of labor. Congratulations, well done. Do not listen any further. Better to focus on other topics like breeding livestock, learning chess, play hide and seek with your children, call your elders, or clean the bottom drawer of your desk that you know needs a good wiping for a year. If you're still listening, however, welcome. You have a fantastic opportunity in front of you. Having your organizational division of labor and authority under control is like having good health. If you have it, you do not think too much about it and take it as a normal way of living. But if you don't have it, you often lose your footing and cling to dear life at a fraction of your capabilities. Calculating the size of the prize is therefore not simple, since it depends on how sick you actually already are. Examples of companies with well-defined division of labor can be found over the last century, generally in the top 10 of the Fortune 500. Today, Apple, Walmart, Google, Johnson & Johnson, and Procter & Gamble are often quoted as good examples. The whole topic is straightforward and common sense, but only for those that made it happen. Today, we decided to add blueprint development to our standard podcast structure. We will describe one path to bring full transparency from top to bottom and maintain it. There are many different ways of how you can do it. I just walk you through one approach that has worked well. This is, however, not an all-you-can-eat buffet in which you can pick and choose certain aspects. To be successful, I recommend following the cadence outlined here or choose your own path. If you need more material to understand more about this concept, read articles in the Harvard Business Review, the Hackett Group, and on the websites of more strategic consultancies. Search for RACI, organizational design, or agile organizations. Alternatively, you can check us out, and if interested, give me a call to have a dialogue about the art of the possible in your shop. So here is the 6-step blueprint design guideline for getting your division of labor turned into a 21st century, agile and highly effective model. Action 1. Drafting the design. Under the guidance of HR and/or a strategic advisor consultancy, the management board has to embark on a crucial exercise to review and potentially update the company's overall purpose, strategy, and long-term financial goals. The essential task is often overlooked, but it is necessary to ensure that the work you do later is actually defining a setup that leadership fully subscribe to. In an offsite, you as well clarify the role of each organizational entity and function, ensuring everyone is on the same page regarding expectations and responsibilities. Leadership participants can approach this exercise by starting from scratch or leveraging existing public domain division of labor resources. The result will be a draft document that can serve as a blueprint for the rest of the organization to calibrate its current state and propose dates. This exercise is important to ensure the organization remains aligned with its overall purpose and goals while adapting to changing market conditions. Action 2. Defining the current state. In this step, every organizational area, geographical, divisional, corporate, functional, as well as every hierarchy in each area, so from the head of the organization, then the direct reports, their direct reports, and so on, receive the task to define in a standardized format what their roles and responsibilities currently are. And if you don't have a format available, Helmig Advisory has a few examples on this. Action 3. Calibrating to align or update the purpose, strategy, and long-term financial goals. Now, here, any overlaps between organizational entities are cleared up by having the affected organization or layers hash it out. In layer discussions, so between the boss and his or her subordinates, a mediator should be engaged to enable both sides to have an open dialogue free of repercussions. If there is no result, the board sponsor gets involved and either decides him or herself or brings the issue to the management board to discuss and agree. When I had the chance to do this the last time around with an organization, it was quite a hoot. When you read through the department's self-definitions, you will find that it mirrors and often overlaps with many others. Having these departments then come together and hash it out requires a mediator, since both believe they are right. If the management board has done a good job in defining the overall swim lanes, the solutions will be found. No foul compromises. We want to get rid of friction to focus on markets, customers, and hence profit. A similar involvement of the management board is needed if any entity identifies change proposals to what has been defined before as a blueprint design draft. In a grown-up and open culture, many challenges will materialize and should be celebrated. The board of directors need to calibrate current and future design by evaluating the differences in opinions with a clear focus on customers and markets. It is fun to, for example, talk through the role of regional and local management, juggling between their fiduciary tasks they have and their corporate roles and responsibilities they have. The same with regard to the customer focus. Who is responsible is an interesting discussion that needs to be resolved in the management board. And depending on your culture and the markets that you serve, the answer can be quite different every time. Action 4. Publish future state design. The agreed and finalized version of the roles and responsibilities of every part of the organization will need to be published after the dust from the discussions has settled. With support from HR and/or external experts, every entity will refine its leadership and employee competency profiles to match the updated roles. These competencies are built into a standard job profile template and have to be compensation graded. There are many grading mechanisms. I personally like the Hay grading model, now owned by Conferry. But not to take it as a gospel, there is no perfect grading system. It always takes more or less calibration into your company. Action 5. How do we operationalize this whole thing now? Having the structure from top to bottom defined, HR now is in the lead for the organization to match personnel internally and as needed externally with the job profiles. Corresponding competency assessments, trainings, and certifications have to be defined. This period needs to take a while, I'd say about a year. People that do not have the competency required on the updated or newly defined job profiles have to be time-boxed, meaning staying on the position for a while they can either gain the needed competencies or are grandparented by their superiors. This should be noted in the personal and position profiles so that we do not create another tribal system. If the person moves on, the replacement should fulfill the job requirements now for the first time by 70 to 80%. By the way, there is no perfect state in this setup. You define a competency and job profile network to have thresholds of whom you should have on the job. In reality, this is not so clear. If you, however, done a good job in cascading from corporate governance via departments' roles and responsibilities down to individual contributor level, then you have an interest to either find the people to match your requirements or change the requirements. Action 6. Control and improve. The above needs to be measured, controlled, and updated annually to catch outliers and regular changes. We could talk about this for hours, but I'm sure that by now you get the drift and define for yourself the best method to keep the construct alive and adaptable. Now, after we did an excursion in the definition and implementation process of the blueprint, now let's look at the overall change process if you like to align your division of labor setup with the purpose, strategy, and the financial goals. As always, we start with the time plan. It takes about 12 months, 3 months blueprint, 9 months implementation. You will now say, wow, all that stuff we have defined before, ready and implemented in 12 months, impossible. Well, if you put your mind to it, it can be done. My teams and I did it for a large company, so yes, it is possible. Besides this, you as well have an interest to have the organization not too long being frozen and navel-gazing. This whole project is important to make a company or a department more agile, but it is as well internally focusing, which is a distraction. If your purpose is to serve your customers and markets, so get over it. The board sponsor has to be the CEO together with the CHRO. No one else can drive that. If any of them approach this topic lukewarm, don't bother and drop it, and good luck muddling along. The project leader, either a top HR talent reporting to a head of human resources or chief of staff reporting to the CEO, unless this position is just a glorified secretary. Another alternative is as well a great process person with Lean or Six Sigma background. Project setup. After the blueprint, which we discussed, and structure is clear, we need weekly task force meetings with a clear objective, monthly reporting on board level by the CHRO, and clear output KPIs. Percent of organization defined by RACI, percent of job profiles defined, personnel certified, people grandparented and time-boxed, promotions, demotions, attritions, hiring, you know it. After the 12 months, we have to make sure that we sustain and control the process. The governance structure as well as the HR maintained job catalog and competency curriculum need yearly approval of the changes of governance by the board and the executive committee. Let's face it, in today's world, new competency pop up always, sometimes in months or years, no longer in decades. If you do not integrate these new skills into your job and competency profiles, you will be left behind. As always, we talk as well, what is the digitalization automation opportunity? It is slow. Most of the work that we talked about can be done on an automation level of an Excel sheet. There is, however, one exception. If you can establish throughout the whole cascade, from corporate governments to individual competencies and roles of individual contributors, how much of this is analog versus digital enabled. As an example, take the topic of approvals we talked about earlier. If the CEO needs to approve corporate investments over $5 million, does she do it on paper, per email, or digital in a workflow approval system? You might ask why. Very simple. Every digital enabled task is giving you the option to process mine the whole flow and constantly optimize it. You can correlate approvals with success or failure of the projects or investments later, and draw updated conclusions of what should be changed. And it's just so much quicker. Now let's look at the risk. From our perspective, it's zero. If done with relentless focus for 12 months, it is overall housekeeping, organizational hygiene, call it spring cleaning, and repeat it every year. Now let's look at cost. Overall, it's going to be medium. There is a certain cost of external training and certification if you get it right. So per average employee cost about 1,000 Swiss francs a year or dollars in the first 3 years, after that less. And then there is a side effect to this, which reduces your cost. If you train, you reduce attrition because people feel valued since you invest in them. What are the watch-outs? Not that many, but as typical, make sure that there is no deprioritization of the project by parts of the organization, and having missing matrix to track the compliance when governance is established. That's all, folks. Thank you for being interested in the third and last installment of the mini-series about organizational design with a focus on the division of labor. I hope we could give you some thoughts on how to stop constant reorganization towards an organizational design that is in line with your markets and your culture. You will gain tens of thousands of man days when you are able to stop reorganizations and focus on the customer and product. Next up, with our podcast, we will tackle the topic of excellence and talk about what it takes to start a quality revolution.
Did you enjoy this podcast episode? Do not miss any further segment and sign up for the Close the Gap blog and the Supply Chain Dialogues podcast on our webpage, or listen in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any other major platform. And if you are interested in having a dialogue about the above, receiving some advisory support on how to tackle the topic best in your firm, give us a call or leave a comment on our webpage in the contact section.
So that's it. Stay safe and be bold. Goodbye.